Dave here,
I'm Ted.
and we're Nerdarchy, and today we're going to be giving some Game Master tips on rewarding your players for their backstory. Um,
Basically, here is the greatest tool and the greatest advantage that's being offered to you as a GM, as a DM. You have a world that it might be something that you're playing right out of a book, or it might be something that you're creating, or it could be something that you're throwing together. But players, if you got good players, they want to be somebody. They don't want to just be this two-dimensional character sheet and trudge through adventures. If you read novels, if you watch TV shows, if you've got somebody who's just there going through the motions, it's not as enjoyable to take part in. So if you tell your players, look, I'm not letting you role play this character unless you give me some kind of backstory. Who was he before we sat down at the table? Before he walked into that inn, before he, came to your city, whatever time frame or whatnot setting you're in, there's somebody there. I personally, as a player, I can't sit at the table and just roll up with some dude without knowing why he is, what he is, where he is. It's all important. You can't make a decision without having that information. My typical is 1 to 2 pages typed about who my character is and why he's doing what he's doing, because it allows me to make those decisions. Do you do that?
yeah, sometimes I do, but no matter what kind of person you are as a player, as a gamer, you don't have to write pages and pages of backstory. Even if you just come up with where your character's from and why he's adventuring, something interesting for the game master to latch onto and incorporate into his story. As a game master, I always like to look at my character, the characters that my players have presented me, and any backstory they have, because I like to build my adventures around those. And whenever possible, I like to interweave those backstories in ways that my players never anticipated and didn't never thought about, because instead of doing the old, you're all sitting in a tavern, and you randomly throw them together. A lot of times, I'll put the players in situations based on their backstory that kind of has them all in the same place, and I'll turn that into a plot for my initial adventure arc. And what this does is this gets to your players to really engage with the game and the world you're presenting. You're making them feel important, and you're making them feel like their characters matter to the story, because each one of them, even though they have different goals, different backstory, all of a sudden you made a handful of them, the star, the center of attention. And the funny thing is, you can have a bunch of players feeling the same way at the same time, and they don't even realize that the story is just about as much the other characters as it is theirs.
Perfect example. This guy was running a campaign in a setting that we developed, and I had an undead slayer. Now, his character was created, way back when in advanced, second edition, and his backstory was complex. I came up as like, okay, well, I want to do this and I want to do that, and we went back and forth, and he added some bit about undead ravaged the elven city, and the queen has been afflicted by some kind of sickness, and of all the people in the town, my character, who specialized in undead studies so that I could kill them better, I knew the most amount of information, and I had to go find these rare bits of things to find a cure for this queen. It's my queen. I gotta help her. I gotta protect her, and like the rest of the party is all somewhat urban. They're mostly human, and he gathers them all together, and he gets them off on this minor quest to go here and go deal with this one situation that has to deal with undead. I didn't know anything about them. I'm just out trying to kill undead and trying to find these rare ingredients, and the first time the party encounters my character is during a fight. Now, being elven and whatnot, I was somewhat, somewhat, fruity or whatever. I always sang when I went into battle, but being an undead slayer, I like kind of sang like a creepy tune. I guess you could say.
Yeah, more melancholy.
So the first time the party sees me, they're already engaged in combat, and he against some undead foe. And out of the woods steps this, grim-faced elven warrior who just is singing this somewhat haunting, melancholy tune. And just striding, I'm not like sprinting into battle, but like making determined strides directly towards them. And they didn't know what to do because my character hadn't been introduced yet. And here they are seeing this thing. It's like, well, is this another adversary or is this is this an ally? And it was sewn in quite well, and it was interesting, and far from I didn't realize what they were doing. I just know, here's undead, I got to go kill them, and it weaved our stories together, and we went off doing our own thing. But if I wouldn't have had, that in-depth backstory of looking for this and whatnot, I wouldn't have had as grand an entrance. I wouldn't have had, as memorable a character for these people to, really associate with. And it would have just been like, one other guy that just is a character sheet that gets just pushed aside when that campaign's over. So a backstory can do so much for you as a player and as a GM. So...
Well, my end of things, what it did too is it started helping me flesh out parts of the world, and I like to work in abstracts when I'm building my campaign world. I like to go paint broad strokes and fill them in as I go, and that gave me a broad stroke that I could work towards later in the game, and that's only one example because there's tons of games where we've done this. Ted does kind of the similar thing. We're always looking for those players that stand out, who do, just that bit more of work on their characters, because it gives us it makes our job easier.
It does.
We don't have to think about it as much. We know what their goals are, what they're doing, opposed to someone who just wants to come there and roll some dice and, beat up some monsters. It's great. Those players want to play too, but it's so much better when you can get them involved. And I find... if you take one of those players, a hacker and slasher, and you start doing stuff around their character, it kind of pulls them out a little bit. It causes them to then immerse themselves in the character just a little bit more. You're not going to completely change who they are, but you can help them grow as players, as well, and enhance everyone's experience at the table. Is what I've found.
That's absolutely right. We've had characters that have shown up, and they aren't familiar with that, creating a backstory. So if you say, look, even if it's pulling teeth to get them to give you, a paragraph about, who their person is and what they're doing, you'll be able to integrate them into the story, and then once they start seeing, your subplots, that are revolving around them, they'll sit back and they'll realize, wow, this was about me tonight. That's awesome, and I've done that with characters. So if you sit there and you watch a television show, and be it a modern day thing or a fantasy thing, it's if the characters are just rolling through whatever is shoved in their faces, it's not as compelling. Whereas, you met someone from your past, and you now have to deal with this complication. It's like, holy crap, I never foresaw this. If you create a problem, like, all right, and that undead slayer, I created this issue. Well, somebody had to send those undead to attack the town. That pretty much gives you some kind of nemesis, or at least villain out there that you eventually are going to have to go face, whether you think about it or, at the time of creation or not. All right, you made this undead slayer. This all happened. So you as the DM can sit back and say, all right, well, how can I best use this? All right, this guy's got this problem, which winds up giving me this little bit of information, which winds up giving me this, and now we've got this villain to pull in, and, you know, how broad is he working? What is his plans? What is his goals? And you can create more, as Dave says, you know, more of this world and fill it in with people and monsters and places that are going to allow your players to eventually get there and deal with that threat. So there's a, you know, a good several sessions of material that's provided by a 1-paragraph backstory.
Plus, you know, there's another thing too. Like we had previously done a video on winging it as the game master. What I find is if you intertwine the backstory of as many players as you can into your game, you're not going to have to wing it nearly as much, because you don't have to give them the hook; they gave it to you. You know, so it's almost like the reverse hook. You know, the reverse hook is nearly inescapable because it's what the players wanted to do, and you know they don't have to be trying to do the same things.
So wait a second. So if I'm playing a superhero, you know, like I'm Spider-Man and Aunt May's been kidnapped, you mean I have to go save her?
No, Aunt May's gonna come save you. It's a reverse.
Oh.
No, but you know, I ran several games. I ran this Eberron game where, you know, my players were all working towards a particular goal, except for one guy. He was actually working against the players to do a different goal, and they never knew about it throughout the whole game. You know, that it was a short-lived game, but it was one of the most fun. Everyone was so involved. You know, we ran a lot of the adventures even inside the city, which we hadn't done a whole lot of that. And for me, like one of the most memorable parts were, you know, they had this running battle through the streets of Eberron, and with these gnolls after they like had to infiltrate his lair and steal something or something like that, and then you know they finally get away from the gnolls, and they're safe and they escape, and next thing you know, they've got the Dark Lanterns and the City Watch, you know, surrounding them. I think they're like on the docks getting ready to finalize their escape. And, you know, they're getting ready to throw down with the Watch because the Watch is trying to arrest one of their members. Well, it turns out the player, their character, had been working against the party the whole time. And you know, coincidentally, this player was moving away from us. So he wasn't going to be in our game anymore. So what I did is when he was about to leave his last session, I had his character get arrested at the end of the session, and then it was finally revealed that he'd been working against the party the whole time. One of our players was from House Thrask, and he thought this other guy was also another House member, but it turns out he had forged all the documentation and faked everything, and everyone's jaw at the table just dropped when the character revealed, no, actually these guys got me, because he actually started liking the other players and building relationships with them, but he still had a job to do. So he really didn't have any malice. It was just a job for him. So when it came down to it, instead of, you know, an all-out fight breaking out with the Watch, he's like, no, they got me. I did what they said.
And this guy has so ingratiated himself into the party that as he's being arrested and straight up being told, you know, by him and by the Watch that, you know, he did wrong by us, we still had a party member who didn't want to let them take him away. He was ready to throw down against the Watch after all of it was revealed, because he was part of the party. It was hysterical, you know. Never gonna forget that one. That was just awesome.
So it's things like that where the player's backstory just so propels your game forward. So, you know, always try and say yes to your players. Try and accommodate them when you can. You know, I'm not saying let them bully you or run your game, but I had read in one of the GM guides, or I don't even remember what system, that you know, you should try and say yes whenever you can. When your players want to do something, think about how you can say yes, Now, of course, some players are unreasonable and you can't do what they want. But if you can incorporate something into the game, you should. It's a shared experience, right? So anytime the player can add something to my world, I love it because it's a piece of work that I don't have to do.
So what we're saying is, if you start in a game, just talk to your players and say, look, before we get started, give me a scoop. Give me who this guy is. If he's a superhero, what's his secret identity? You know, where did he get his powers? If you're playing a fantasy game, you know, why is he not with his his race? Why is he not staying with his town? You know, is he an outcast or is he not? You know, how did he become that insert class name here? You know, and the more information that you can get, the better. Because as Dave says, as I said, you know, it's going to help you write your material, and it's going to make the character, when any backstory comes to integrate into the actual plot, it's going to make them really feel like a part of the world. You know, Spider-Man, he tries a little bit harder, and he cares a lot more when he's got to go save Aunt May. And you really need to have this stuff for a compelling and interesting game. I mean, yeah, you can go out there and you can run a mod, and characters are going to have a lot of fun with it. You know, pre-written adventures, or you know, just one that you create yourself. They're great, but if you've got that interwoven plot from their backstory, I guarantee you it's going to be better. So, just want to offer that out to you guys. Go ahead and make some comments, click like, subscribe, check out our other videos. But for today, I'm Ted.
Dave.
This is Nerdarchy,
And
nerd
out.
stuff for nerds. Have a good one.